Good afternoon. Welcome to the August 2nd meeting of the Rotary Club of South Jacksonville. It's great to be a Rotarian. I ask that you silence your phone and conversations, and if you're attending on Zoom, we welcome you also and ask that you mute yourself. And I think we have a very special guest on Zoom today, honorary member and past president Dan Roby. So let's Dan, we're here every week, so join us, okay?
Tell him to show himself. We can see how much he's aged. You'll still laugh.
You still have the Elvis costume?
You're on mute.
I have aged quite a bit for sure.
Well,
You look good.
thank you for joining us. I'd like to invite Chris Roberts up to lead our pledge and prayer today.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let us pray. Dear Lord, thank you for our abundance of gifts and blessings, as well as the opportunity to gather in communion with our fellow Rotarians.
That's probably going to be mine.
How is? That's all right.
How big is the fine now?
All right, let's start this over. Let us pray. Dear Lord, thank you for the abundance of gifts and blessings, as well as the opportunity to gather in communion with our fellow Rotarians. However, let us also be thankful for our challenges, for it is often in our times of struggle that we find the most meaningful growth. As we navigate our own personal challenges, give us the emotional elasticity and empathy to support others as well, and give us the strength to extend such grace to not only our families, friends, and neighbors, but also and especially to those whom we may not understand or agree with. As Rotarians, we strive to lead and make a positive impact in our local and global communities. In such a pursuit, remind us to act and react with humility and compassion. Help us embody our values, not just recite them. Broaden our shoulders and brace our backs for the carrying of others' responsibilities. Remember, help us to do nobly, help us do them nobly and with dignity and integrity. Now, for the gifts given and forgiven, we thank you. Amen.
Amen.
And my apologies, you know. Oh, well. All right. I'm going to recognize past President Harlan Voss to introduce our guests and visiting Rotarians.
Thank you, President Charlie. Just thinking about a cell phone on the loose should be some sort of donation. Paul Harris. Can I get a motion?
I'll second it.
It's my honor to introduce our visiting Rotarians and guests today. And Tamara, would you introduce your guest, please?
Yes. Today I have with me Miss Olivia Bray. She is a mechanical engineer by degree with a bachelor's and master's from UNF. And she's now working with us as one of our project engineers at Baker & Sutton.
Wonderful. It's a short list today unless we have any other guests or any visiting Rotarians. Well, Olivia, we would like to sing to you. That'd be okay. All right, let me sort of get us started.
We here in Rotary welcome you today. So glad you came along, glad you came our way. Our hand of fellowship is yours, in sunshine or in rain. We here in Rotary say welcome, come again.
Here's the irony of folks. So, a motion's been made to impose a fine by Bill Trayer. And I seconded as being the first offender. And as we're standing there, whose phone goes off? Bill? All right.
I was reaching to turn it off.
Yeah. That's
You know a good public defender?
Yes, I do. He's downstate and, all right. We'll figure out the amount here first. All right. I want to invite Crystal Brown up to provide us with our family of Rotary updates. Crystal?
Okay. Birthdays this month. Well, last month, July 30th was Lynn Bowman. And we have August 2nd is Tyree Boyer, and past President Robert Harris on August 9th, Parker Shields on August 10th, and Judge Khalil on August 13th. And we have years of service. We have Mary Alice Phelan, 30 years. Jay Plotkin will be 23 years. And past President David Bissell, 21 years. Ooh, and past President Harlan Voss, 21 years. And Christy King, 8 years. Lisa Marie Winslow, 5 years. And Parker Shield, a mere 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Couple of special announcements coming up. Reminder that there will be no luncheon meeting next week, but we will be having an evening social at Blue Bamboo on San Jose Boulevard beginning at 5:30 p.m. We'd ask that you go on DACDB and reserve so we can get a general feel for how many people will be there. We'll try to remember to send out a link in the gear this week, asking that you sign up so we know how many folks are going to be there.
Or a show of hands, like right now.
Or a show of hands, how many people are intending on attending?
Is that Tuesday?
Tuesday at 5:30. So
How much is it?
it's a $15 surcharge, but
Yes, come through.
guests come free. Yeah, I mispronounced. So hands up again. I saw 4, 5, 6, 7, I'm thinking we're showing right under 20 at least at this group.
Okay, good, then we're still on.
Yeah, I think we'll be good. And for those of you all that attended Blue Bamboo's social last year, it was really a fun evening. Good food, and so I hope you can join us. So now I'm going to recognize Mr. Traer for a Paul Harris moment. And by the end of the year, we're going to have a little competition here. Who's the better presenter between Mr. Traer?
Oh, there's Mr. Traer. He's a god.
Me and my young I appreciate Harlan taking over this because it's a really worthwhile thing. I think the two of us, as well as the club, has learned so much about Paul Harris. He was a flawed individual who came from kicked around between three households and managed to pull himself up and do something really, really special that he didn't even realize when he started. So you'll get more of that probably read to you more by Harlan than me. So this one is I called The Beginning of Change, which is 1900 to 1905. Everybody knows the year that Rotary was officially founded. 1905, right. That's one that's Barry, you remember.
Paul Harris was a heck of a guy.
In 1901, Paul Harris was witnessing to some major changes in the world. With the death of Queen Victoria in January of 1901, the Victorian age died. The automobile, telephone, and a flimsy airplane were leading a technological revolution. The U.S. was asserting itself in places like the Philippines and China. The progressives were born who believed in a stronger central government to take on unrestrained monopolies. This movement centered in Chicago. Paul Lewis was at the epicenter of a storm of social and legal transformation. He wrote, quote, "The closing of wine rooms and assignation houses." Now, I didn't know what an assignation house was, but apparently it's a house of ill repute.
Goes by a different name.
Resulting in the segregation of vice in certain limited areas, and even the red light resorts were padlocked when the state's attorney satisfied his mind that the people really wanted them closed. Paul concludes, again, his quote, "Surreptitious vice and gambling, of course, still continued, but on a greatly diminished scale." But it was Chicago after all. In 1900, Paul was still under duress to build his law practice. Over the 4 years since settling in Chicago, he had made few friends, although he stayed in contact with George Clark and Jacksonville. Because of the diverse types of bankruptcy clients he encountered, there were few occasions to develop close friendships with these clients. During the week, he was busy looking for new business or attending court. He was restless spiritually, and he started attending various churches, including the Presbyterian, the Baptist, the Congregationalist, the Roman Catholic, the Jewish, the Methodist, the Quakers, and the Christian Scientists. I mean, we left out. He was, oh, yeah.
They weren't around yet.
He was 33 years old with little or no serious prospective female companions to share his thoughts and desires with. Realizing success in commerce went hand in hand with the ability to establish a network of well-connected friends. Paul joined several social and business-oriented clubs. He did meet a number of likely contacts, but the conversations and relationships developed at these meetings remained shallow. Fancy country clubs and their stuffy snobbishness and strict adherence to rules held little importance for him. He became homesick and decided to go visit his old home in Wallington, Vermont, where his grandparents were. This was a transitional period for not only Paul's family, but also for his legal practice. It was during this period that Paul spent a lot of time meditating, and he meditatively declared to have rediscovered the core values of his grandparents. And remember, his grandparents really were the ones that raised him, especially his grandfather. He declared, quote, "Their values have become my ideals." He dedicated himself to his grandparents' concepts of integrity, quote, integrity, frugality, tolerance, and unselfishness. Next week, he returns to Chicago.
Yes,
Can I ask our learned historian a question?
yes, you may.
Thank you. I've heard this as folklore for many years, that after Paul Harris left Jacksonville, wound up in Chicago, founded Rotary, and he called or contacted an old friend in Jacksonville. I don't know if that was still George Clark or what, but he said, we've started this great thing in Chicago, and you ought to see about doing it in Jacksonville. And the response he got was, nah, that just doesn't sound like that'll ever fly, that kind of a thing. Have you ever heard this, or has anybody ever heard this?
Yes, heard George tell that story.
George Linville?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not gonna answer that because that's in the future episode. You have to wait until Harlan reads that. We're coming up on that pretty
Yes,
soon.
the response was that Jacksonville already had all it needed. It didn't need.
Was that it? Yeah.
But that was the response George used to say.
Well, George was certainly an authority.
Well, we're getting into a time period where there's, you know, a lot of what's been written about him, some he wrote 20 years later himself, and other people wrote. So there's even a dispute over 1905. There was a meeting he had in 1904, and they thought maybe that's when it really formed. And the guy who was leaving would claim, well, that's when Rotary started. And he, years later, resolved, I think in the 1920s, when he said it was, I think it was February, some date in February in 1905 when it started. So you're going to find a lot of, as I read farther in the book, there's disputes over things. So I don't know about that one, but I'm sure it's in a future episode.
Well, George Linville reported it that day.
Yeah. it's
Gotta
got
be
to-
right.
Yeah, he got to wear a red coat all the time. Got to.
Well, it could have been a green coat.
All right, all right. Now I'd like to recognize Ed Vaughn for our gift card wrap. this week.
All right, so bigger than a gift card. We've had some great success in our numbers. We need someone to pull our guests.
All right, 388-4033.
I got it.
All right.
Not even my sisters, it's mine. Thank
There you
you.
go. Thank you.
All right.
Now we do know what's in there.
Wow.
Oh, oh my gosh.
I know a good place where you can get that autograph. All right, a reminder about Rotary Leadership Institute in Palm Coast this Saturday. I think you can still register online. So I encourage you, if you've not been to an RLI session, to get down there and learn more about Rotary and Rotary International. All right, let me introduce Crystal to introduce our speaker today.
So we're continuing with our theme of the history of Jacksonville. And we're pleased and happy and excited to welcome Bill Delaney. And those of you who are wondering, is he related to John Delaney? Yes, he is. That is his daddy. So but he went in a different direction than John Delaney. Bill Delaney is a writer, editor, and higher education professional from Jacksonville. Lived here his whole life. And he's the co-owner and editor of moderncities.com, the jacksonmagazine.com, and Edible Northeast Florida magazine. He holds a bachelor's and master's degree in English from the University of North Florida. So why is he here today? Because he wrote this wonderful book called Jacksonville, a guide to the weird, wonderful, and obscure. And this book, I read through it, and there's some things in here I already knew about, but I didn't know about the hurricane lady, and I didn't know about the pontoon owl. So maybe he'll tell us about them today. He's also got books for sale. You can also get these at the San Marco bookstore, as well as at REI, which is where I got mine. So, Bill, welcome.
We need some help getting back into the Zoom meeting, unfortunately. My computer logged me out. Anybody has a
We're
meeting ID?
working on it right now.
Working on it. Ready?
Yeah.
941-1420-3013.
Passcode.
999-299.
This is all confidential information.
Patty may need to make you a host.
Should I go tell her?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, before I get my PowerPoint going, I can you just get started a little bit.
Can you share your screen then?
Let's see. Yes.
Now that we're into serious history, it was nice to harken back to the good old days. And all we had to worry about was whether or not the sound system worked. And when there was a problem with the microphone or the sound system, everybody would turn around to Warren Coughlin, who was a member of the club and owned Florida Sound Engineering, and everybody
We
would
got it.
yell, "Warren!"
Yeah, I know.
And now we
Technology,
yell,
wonderful. So thank you all for having me. My name is Bill Delaney. I'm the author of Secret Jacksonville. And to get started, I kind of want to talk a little bit about the origin of the book. I've been a writer for about 7 years, and my biggest passion is writing about local history, especially the parts of the story that I feel have not really been told, at least to the level that I think they deserve. And so I've been writing for a couple of years. My publisher approached me and they said, well, we have this idea for a book. We've done it in some other cities and it's been successful. We want to do something on the weird, wonderful, and obscure bits of Jacksonville history. And so immediately I jumped at it. I said, yes, I'll do it, because those are the kind of things that I love to research, whether I'm writing a book or not. And so the book has 86 different spots all across the city, all across our region, really, from Cumberland Island down to Marineland in the south. There's 86 of them. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. I'm not going to get through all 86, unfortunately. There'll be a couple of interesting ones. And one reason I like to come out to meetings like this is it gives me a chance to kind of tailor what I talk about to the area that we're in. It's a benefit of having stuff all over our region. And so we're going to start with a couple of stories that are right around here and kind of spin out and touch on a few more. Number one is the treaty oak. Sure, most of y'all are familiar with that, it being on your logo and all. The treaty oak's pretty well known here in Jacksonville. But the story is somewhat less known, and I think it's pretty hilarious. The oak itself is a pretty incredible specimen. Grew up in about 1770, meaning it's over 250 years old, almost certainly the oldest living thing in Jacksonville, as well as the largest. It was noticed for being huge by the late 19th century as people started to move to our part of the city. At that time, what we now call the South Bank of San Marco was South Jacksonville. It was its own separate city. It was the location of a theme park called Dixieland Park, an old school amusement park with rides and ostrich races and animals, alligators. It's the origin of the alligator farm. But as the centerpiece, they had what was known at the time as the giant oak, or the great oak. And there was a plaque. They hung it with fairy lights, electric lights, and there was a plaque that said that it was a place that the Native Americans back in the day used to congregate to meet. And so it was pretty well known for being a big, beautiful tree. It wasn't nearly as big as it is now, but it's still, you look at old pictures, it was pretty impressive. Well, the park closed down in World War I, and the parts of it started getting parceled off for development. And that meant that the tree itself was at risk of being cut down. So to save it, a local journalist named Pat Moran essentially made up a fake story about the tree that would compel people to want to save it. He said it was the site of the first treaty held between the white settlers of early Jacksonville and the Seminole people who lived there, and they met under this tree, formed this historic treaty, and for that reason, it's a bit of Jacksonville history. And it really caught on. It's still the story that you hear about it today. It became known as the Treaty Oak, which is still what we call it today. But it caught the ear of local philanthropist Jessie Ball DuPont, and she decided to buy the property the tree was on and turn it into a city park, transfer it to what by that time was the city of Jacksonville. And so it's still out there today. If you haven't been up to it, I definitely recommend it. This is a picture of it, but it doesn't do it justice at all until you see it, exactly how big and octopus-like that it is. Next up, we're going to go down the street a little bit to Marco Lake. This is a pretty scenic spot in San Marco. It's something, I live in the neighborhood, but it's something that even some other people in the neighborhood tend to pass by because it's not super easy to see unless you happen to own one of the properties that's right on it. But it's a pretty cool scenic spot to visit. It's popular for boaters and fishermen, but it has an interesting history. Back in the day when this was all South Jacksonville, all of the area around San Marco Square was part of a brickyard. And the clay pit was what is now Marco Lake. That's where they dredged up the clay. Well, after the original Costa Bridge was built, there was more connection to South Jacksonville and it started to grow. And the owner of the brickyard, Telfair Stockton, realized that it was going to be a lot more valuable as residential development than it would be as a brickyard. So they shut down the brickyard and they parceled out all of the brickyard, the higher level areas as houses. They created San Marco Square. They gave it the name San Marco. That's where that comes from. San Marco originally only referred to that one area, but it became so famous that it kind of became the name for all of the surrounding areas as well. Rather than fill in the clay pit, he decided to save it as a water feature. So they put bulwarks around it, they punched a canal out to the river to flood it, and they created an artificial lake. So it's a pretty cool area. If you look at old pictures, for a long time, it wasn't really used for anything. It was just kind of a passive feature. But over time, people started realizing it was a great place for boating and fishing. And today there's about 3 places you can see it. You can see it from the bridge over the canal. You can see it in a couple of different spots, but it's really cool. And when you look at it, you're looking at a piece of our unusual history. It's the most scenic brickyard clay pit that I know of. Next up, how many people recognize this guy? Yeah, pretty much everybody. It's Sexy Rexy. He's another one he's pretty much an icon at this point. I knew that when I wrote this book, I wasn't going to be able to avoid having him, so I put him on the cover. But his story is pretty intriguing. He is a mascot from a former mini golf park called Goonie Golf. There were two of those back starting in 1970, one on the west side and one there on Beach Boulevard, which was then mostly undeveloped. Sexy Rexy became kind of an icon even at that time because of where he was located on the property. He was right up against the wall facing Beach Boulevard, so he was very visible. He is actually part of the company, the franchise was part of, had a whole stable of these goofy characters that the local operators could buy, but they had to be assembled locally because they were so big and heavy. They're made out of concrete. So they hired a local pool builder to put him together. He's orange. There's another one that looks like him down in St. Pete that still survives. Unfortunately, most others have been demolished. That almost was the fate of our beloved Rexy as well. When Goonie Golf closed down in the early zeros, whatever you call that first decade, the early 2000s, there was a risk that everything was going to be demolished. The developer was going to turn it into a big strip mall with some housing behind it. But there was such a public outcry. There was multiple newspaper articles at the time and TV shows about him. People wanted to save him. And so the developer decided, well, we'll just save him as the mascot for our strip mall. They even had a contest to name him. Sexy Rexy was the contest winner. There was others in there that were less creative, like Rexy or Rex. But Sexy Rexy was the winner. And he's gone on. They hired some students, engineering students from UNF to fix him up and get his eyes working again. So they now glow as you're going down the road. And he is currently a very well-known landmark that people, to this day, still use him as the reference point. Like, all right, go up Beach Boulevard, take your second left past the dinosaur. Next up, we're going to go over to the west side of town, northwest, over in the neighborhood of Durkeeville. And Durkeeville is a historic African-American neighborhood. It's located right to the west of Springfield. And it is home to J.P. Small Memorial Park, formerly Durkee Park. This was a site of a lot of Jacksonville sports history. It was the site of all of our spring training games that were hosted here in the early 20th century. It was all of our minor league baseball teams. But in 1938, it became home to the Jacksonville Redcaps in the Negro Major Leagues. They were the only Negro Major League team ever to play in Florida. And because those leagues are now considered full-on major leagues by Major League Baseball, they were the first major league sports team in Florida in any sport. They were only here for 3 years, and they spent 2 more years in Cleveland, kind of in between. But their history is really something. It speaks hugely about Jacksonville's position at the time. That wasn't the only history that we had. It's also the place where Hank Aaron helped to break Jacksonville's color line. This park is located, if you go out there, it's on Myrtle Avenue, pretty busy street right in the middle of a neighborhood. But Hank Aaron was hired by what were then known as the Jacksonville Braves, a predecessor to the modern Jumbo Shrimp. And they had a new owner, Sam Wolfson. And the team had been terrible before he bought them. And he said he was going to turn them around. And he wasn't going to let kind of Southern squeamishness stand in the way of a championship. And so when the Braves team up in Atlanta said that they were gonna start to integrate their minor league teams, and the league that he was in said they were going to integrate, he jumped at the chance. He hired not 1, but 3 black baseball players. They're the first ever to play on an integrated team in Jacksonville history, one of the first anywhere in the South. And Hank Aaron was immediately a star. Within 1 year, they went from being the last place team for most of the previous 20 years to winning the championship that year. And Hank Aaron was named the league MVP. And he only played here for 1 year. He was immediately called up to the majors after that. Excuse me. But he really left his mark here. Now, Sam Wolfson, of course, was the namesake of the park that was built downtown shortly after that. But the old park was still saved. It was used by Edward Waters, and for Stanton High School, they use it for baseball and some community events. And because of that, it's now Jacksonville's only surviving historic baseball stadium. It's very cool to go to. It's really a slice of the way that sports used to be played. And there's even a little museum inside it that's dedicated to Jacksonville's sports history. Next up, this is one of my favorite stories. I am an evangelist for this place. This is Bulls Bay Preserve. And that is an honest to God waterfall. Now, this is Florida, so it's not much of a waterfall. It's maybe 4 feet, but still, that's pretty cool. There's only a handful of places in all of Florida that you can see a real natural waterfall. But Bulls Bay area has a lot of history of its own. Bulls Bay is located on the west side, right north of Old Plank Road. And it's a big, probably 1,200 acre swamp. Interesting thing about it is it was actually the site of the personal slave plantation of Isaiah D. Hart, the founder of Jacksonville. So it was where he lived when he had a home in the city as well. It's about 10 miles away, which at that time was not an insignificant distance, especially being as it was out on the swamp. The swamp itself was known as the Cracker Swamp at that time. Mostly, it was named after the people that lived around there, known as Florida Crackers. Nobody really knows where the name Bulls Bay came from. It's not on an ocean. There's cows out there, but like why cows there and not any of the other places that there's cows? No one really has any idea. It could be that the bay is a reference to bay trees that are commonly seen in the swamps. Well, after the Civil War, it was sold off, but it was not really developed. It wasn't very useful for too much else. So it stayed mostly intact. Around the edges started to get developed. The swamp was used for sand mining and for logging and some things like that, but it never saw any development. And then in the 1990s, my father, John Delaney, was mayor of one of the companies that had property around it and that owned the entire swamp. They wanted to develop something. And so the city struck a deal with them where they could develop what they wanted, but then they would deed all of the rest of the swamp over to be saved as a natural preserve. It's the origin of 2 of the major tributaries of the St. Johns River. A 6-mile creek rises there, as does the Cedar River. And so they said it's a very ecologically sensitive area. This will be a great get. And so as part of the preservation project, they snapped up the land. And also it happens to be along the old Baldwin Railroad that they turned into a rail trail. It's connected with Camp Milton and some other sites out there. But it was preserved. And the intention at that time was always to turn it into a park. But there was kind of a dispute between the city and the state and the water management district over what could and couldn't be done. And it just kind of got bogged down in the rules that never really happened. And then quietly, 20 years after that fact, in 2020, it finally was open as a park, but very quietly. There was no announcement or anything. I didn't even know this place. What I've always found fascinating about it, I've lived here 40 years, my entire life. For a living, I research unusual and strange things about Jacksonville, and I had no idea that this was there. That there was a waterfall on a tributary that you could see and they've cut a trail out to it. It's about a quarter mile in. It's a really easy walk to find the waterfall. And so, I did some more reading and I realized that my dad was the one who preserved the park. I said, Dad, I called him up. I said, Dad, you never told me that there was a waterfall at Bulls Bay Preserve. And he said, there's a waterfall at Bulls Bay. He didn't even know. He was the one who bought the park and he didn't realize it was there. At least he didn't remember if he ever knew. So it just goes to show you that there's always interesting things that are lying off the beaten path if you go look for them. In Jacksonville, I call it the secret city. A lot of our best stuff is stuff that isn't, so universally known. That also means that you don't have to go very far to see something really unique and cool. So thank you.
Behind Sexy Rexy, I think there used to be a par-3 pitch and putt golf course back there, which had an interesting thing. There were only 9 holes and 18 tees. And so you could play it twice by just doing different tees. And sometimes the tees and the greens crisscrossed each other. It was a good training ground.
Is that another question?
Yeah. When I grew up in Jacksonville and out in Mandarin, I don't know if you dealt with this in your book, there was this train, little train out there that you could go out. We were kids and ride the train out to the woods near right on Mandarin Road.
Near the post office.
Well, right by the market. Yeah, I don't know if you.
Yeah, it's not in the book. I did hear about that. I didn't include it because there's not really much to see. I would definitely be fascinated to hear more about it. It was like from a park, right? Or
yeah, it was a small train. And those kids looked huge to us.
Right. Yeah.
He rode through. You just made a circle out there somewhere. As I recall, from my child's mind, then it didn't seem like it was very long. Or there were no dinosaurs. They needed Sexy Rexy.
Yeah.
That's all the kids would have loved it then.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff like that. There was an Asian garden in San Marco, it's called Oriental Gardens actually, that was there. And then even after that shut down, a lot of the plants survived in the houses that were built there. A couple of the little features that they had put out there. There's a lot that that we've lost over time.
So you talked about Bulls Bay Preserve. How did you find it? And how do you go about finding?
That's a good question. And that one's interesting. That one just happened to be, I run a website, thejacksonmag.com, where a lot of my writing appears and I talk about the weird stuff that I find. That one, somebody literally just sent me a video of a waterfall. And I saw it, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I figured it was one that went out in the Panhandle. Because there's a couple of them out there that you can see. And I was like, oh, is that where it is? And he goes, no, that's at Bulls Bay, right here in Jacksonville. It's like, where's Bulls Bay Preserve? He told me it's 10 miles from downtown. You can literally see downtown Jacksonville from Plank Road right in front of it. So I was like, okay, I have to go know more about this. Took my wife, ran out there, just with a cell phone, got some pictures. And then I started digging into the story of it. And I was like, this is a much more interesting story than I ever would have thought. And it just blew my mind that there was something like that I had never heard of, and that there was a park even that they had opened without really, announcing it or making a big deal out of the fact that there's a waterfall there. But that tends to be how I get a lot of my stories. Somebody will tell me something, point out a cool thing, and I just go and dig into it. Some of them, like during COVID, my wife and I just got in the car a bunch of times. There wasn't anything else to do, so we just kind of drove around and went to see what we could find.
I think I'm going to have to correct you on the parent club of the local baseball team.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, back in the 50s, the parent club were the Milwaukee Braves.
That's right, yeah.
Became the Atlanta Braves.
Yeah.
When Aaron was first called up, he played in Milwaukee.
Milwaukee, that's right. In fact, I think the first year we owned them, they were actually from Boston.
He didn't play for the Jacksonville Tars.
No, but it was the same team. They just named it the
different
Braves.
Okay, because I remember the Tars.
Yeah.
And I saw Hank Aaron play when he was here. He always said he hit a lot of home runs.
Oh,
He
yeah.
got a lot of men's suits. That there was
That's
a
right.
store in town that gave a complimentary
Yeah.
suit for each home run.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Bill, going back to your publisher asking you to do this, does your publisher do this like as a franchise in different cities?
Yeah.
Where they do these, do they require you to have a certain number of sites?
They had the suggestion of, I think they said like it'll be between 80 and 90, because that's how many pages the book will have. Yeah, and then it includes some other things. So they gave me kind of that idea, but they didn't say like a specific number. They did end up cutting a few of them. Had to cut it down to fit, which broke my heart, but it's just fodder for the sequel.
What did they cut out?
One of them was the Samus Plantation House and Cemetery. It's over in Clifton, part of Arlington. And they were a family, they were prior to the Civil War, a mixed race family that owned this plantation. The wife, Mary Samus, was a daughter of Zephaniah Kingsley and Anna Kingsley, his African wife. And they owned that there. They owned a plantation there, and after the Civil War, they were Union supporters. After the Civil War, it founded a community, and the house is still there, and the cemetery is still there where the family is buried, and Anna Kingsley is actually buried out there. It's not marked with a headstone, unfortunately, so you can't tell exactly where it is. But that was when I wrote the whole thing. I got the pictures, and it just happened to be like I had a lot of other Arlington stuff, so I had to pick and choose. It's like, well, I'm definitely not going to cut Norman Studios, for instance, but yeah.
So what parameters did your publisher give you, other than, I think, you have to have physical presence now?
Yeah, they said a physical presence, something to have a picture of. There's a couple of things that are just kind of like a plaque, and I have a historical photo with it to tell the story. But that was pretty much it. They gave me pretty free rein. They didn't have any issue with anything that I picked. I just wrote it up and I sent it to them, and they were pretty pleased with it. They rely on local authors. They do these in lots of other cities. It was much bigger cities than Jacksonville, and they wanted to branch out into some more middle-sized ones. But they rely on local authors because they're the ones who are gonna know.
Anything to do with the military or the development of the beaches or Ponte Vedra?
Yeah, I have 5 beaches sites. I have NAS Jackson there as the birthplace of the Blue Angels. And also its role in transforming Jacksonville into a Navy city overnight, which has just had an immense impact on our subsequent history. So yeah, I got lots of stuff.
I've seen some photographs of this section of town back, I think, when Dixieland Park was here. And was there also a baseball stadium located over here?
There was a baseball stadium. It was part of Dixieland Park originally, anyway. The park was huge. It was much bigger than the current Treaty Oak Park is. It included most of the blocks around here. They had movie studios, they had alligators, all sorts of things. Yes, sir.
So Ponte Vedra was originally a mineral mining camp.
That's right,
Is that in
yeah.
your book?
No, that's another one. That one was on my long list. That one got cut, fortunately, before I had written about it.
Because I grew up out there and we would go diving for golf balls in the lagoons and you could still feel the tracks in the bottom of the lagoons.
Oh, that's
The
crazy.
mining cars.
Yeah.
There's a chat question.
Yeah.
Oh.
Asking about Brewster Hospital.
Any medical sites?
Any medical site of Brewster Hospital, for example, thinking of Marcus Drew. Let's see. I don't think that I have anything specifically, but that would be definitely something to do in a sequel. Yeah, there's lots of great history there.
because of what you do, I assume you may know Tim Gilmore.
Yes.
Tell us about Jack's Psycho Geo.
Yes, that is a great site. Tim Gilmore runs that site. The idea, I think, psychic geography is supposed to be trying to bring together kind of the physical space, but also the impact it's had on the people. It's kind of out there, but he tells some really great stories. He finds some incredible stuff. He's a source of a number of the things that I have in my book. Just like, I have no idea how he finds some of this.
I ran across this site several years ago and I made a little note of it and then of course forgot about it. And for some reason just found it again a day or two ago, so.
Yeah, it's a great site. We also run some of his articles on my site too. Yes, ma'am?
Do you have any info on Miller's Creek, and if so, could I talk to you about it after?
I don't really have too much info on Miller's Creek to speak of, but I would definitely love to talk.
Are you still doing tours, conducting tours? in
I
Jacksonville?
am doing tours. In fact, I have a bike tour, an electric bike tour this Sunday. That's the last tour that I have until the fall, and then in September I'm going to start them up again. I usually do a monthly Secret Jacksonville tour of different spots around the downtown area, which are pretty fun. I really like doing them. Thanks for reminding me. I do need to get those scheduled. All right.
You're not the guy that was doing the one while in uniform.
No, that's not me.
Okay, some of us in the club did that a few years back. I
Yeah.
say a few years, you know, to me, I think it's 2 or 3 years and it's probably 15.
Yeah. No costumes for me.
But that was really an interesting thing to learn more about downtown and the underground tunnel and why it was built, all that kind of thing.
And I've taken one of his tours. They are great. The walking tours are very good.
Thank you.
Mission of you coming and telling us about the weird things about Jacksonville.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
Having lived here for 40-some years, I think you're just scratching the surface about what's weird about Jacksonville.
Oh, that's for sure.
All right.
Yeah, look at this gathering.
This alone, it's worth a book in and of itself. Again, a reminder, make sure you sign up for the social next week. No meeting here next week. Our next luncheon meeting will be August 16th with our speaker will be Ed Booth, talking about Jimmy Doolittle's historic flight from Jacksonville.
Right.
So we're looking forward to it. I know how much Skipper is involved in history of Jacksonville and researching, so look forward to it. As we end our meeting, if you would stand and join me in the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it true? Second, is there all concern? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Good to see you.